So the St. Alphonsus de Liguori was born in 1696 in Naples, Italy. And he grew up he was intended to become a lawyer, which he did. He lost a certain case, and he said, "World, I know you now." And he realized that the judge had been bribed, which it turned out that the judge had been bribed by a cardinal of the church, no less. The cardinal had bribed the judge with a pair of dancing bears, and so the case went to the opposing the other lawyer and his side. And so St. Alphonsus realized that something had really miscarried in justice. He said, I'm nothing to do with this anymore. So he left the law immediately, decided to become a priest then and there, and then in 1731, there was a series of revelations to the first Redemptorist nun, who had been an ex-Carmelite. The king of Naples had shut down the Carmel, and then God the Father began giving these revelations to Blessed Marie Celeste Croce Rosa, saying, "I want this convent of nuns founded that will be able to perpetuate my life in the world as a life of the Redeemer through prayer and prayer and sacrifice." It was completely contemplative. These are the Redemptorist nuns. So St. Alphonsus helped to start the Redemptorist nuns with Blessed Mary Celeste. The following year, then, there was another series of revelations where our Lord says, "I want the Redemptorist Fathers now." So on November the 9th, 1732, then St. Alphonsus founded the Redemptorist Fathers in Scala in southern Italy, in the Kingdom of Naples. And the whole idea behind the Redemptorists was the plan, God's plan behind this, he said, was for these priests to go out to help what he called the most abandoned souls, people who did not have access to spiritual helps. So in that time, in that place, in Naples, Italy, it was the shepherds who lived out in the mountainsides. There were no churches out there. There might be little wayside chapels or something. And so the Redemptorists would go on horseback into the mountains and open up these wayside chapels, etc., ring a bell, bring in the shepherds, teach them their catechism, help them to make a good confession, give them the means necessary to persevere in God's grace for the future. And that was the beginning of the Redemptorists. And that continued on. St. Alphonsus lived until 1787 when he died. And from then, the Redemptorists began to spread. It was just at the end of the life of St. Alphonsus that St. Clement Hofbauer came outside of Italy. He came from Germany. He was Moravian himself. He came to Rome, and almost by accident, it was really by providence, of course, came to the Redemptorist church there. And there was this little boy who came up to him and said, "You're going to become a Redemptorist." Of course, St. Clement afterwards said, well, that was the infant Jesus. He realized that afterwards. And sure enough, St. Clement did become a Redemptorist there in Rome, and that he was the first Redemptorist to be sent out of Italy to northern Europe. And so that's why all of the Redemptorist houses outside of Europe, here in the United States, etc., they all have descendancy from St. Clement back to St. Alphonsus, actually. There's this lineage that we have, and we can trace our history back to our founder that way. And St. Clement then spread. He went back to Poland and spread, and ultimately ended up in Vienna. He's known as the Apostle of Vienna in Austria. And from there, then the Redemptorists finally came to the United States 100 years after the founding in 1732. So it was in 1832. The Redemptorists came to the United States. There were only six. There were only six that were sent over here, and they suffered incredibly, in fact, and also because of the ways and times and places, America being a very, at that time, complete backwater ecclesiastically. I mean, it was, total missionary area. The bishops insisted that Redemptorists would not simply be monks in a monastery, religious, live with our vows, but they said you have to run parishes or schools for us to help us out. So Pius IX allowed this in the United States because our original rule of St. Alphonsus forbids us to run parishes and schools. We're only allowed to do parish missions and retreats is what we were founded to preach. We are preaching monks. And so in the United States, it was allowed by Pius IX to have parishes and schools. And so from that time, 1832, up through the 20th century, here in the United States, the most abandoned souls that the Redemptorists would go to were mainly, at the beginning, it was the European immigrants who did not speak English in the early 1800s. So they would walk into a Catholic church, and they wouldn't be able to understand the sermons. So you had all of these European Redemptorists coming over who spoke all sorts of Slavic, Germanic, Romance languages, who would be able to preach to the people in their own languages, hear their confessions, again, set them on the right path towards salvation. And then after a couple generations and the grandkids started speaking English, etc., that sort of fell out of necessity, therefore. Now, of course, since Vatican II, of course, everyone's an abandoned soul. And so we simply will preach to whoever will listen to us. So, but that's the whole thrust of the Redemptorists then is this preaching vocation. We are semi-contemplatives. We are meant to be living in our monastery. As St. Alphonsus in our rules says, normally half the year we're in our monastery and then half the year out out preaching. And so during the time in the monastery, we have a whole schedule throughout the day of mental prayer. So there's three half hours of mental prayer, visits to the Blessed Sacrament, other prayers, etc., in common and also in private, etc. And then there's plenty of time also for the priests to be able to prepare sermons, study moral theology particularly, etc. So that's our focus on the confessional practice, etc. St. Alphonsus being the doctor of moral theology, and then for the lay brothers, their job is to provide for the material welfare of the house so that it runs smoothly so that the priests can do the spiritual duties. That's in the house. Then once you get outside the house on the preaching, then the two things that we do, preaching parish missions and retreats. With regards to the parish missions, then it's going out to the parishes. Back in the old days, it would usually be the bishop who would call us out to go to each of the parishes in his diocese. Now, of course, when I'm helping out the society, it's an individual pastor will ask me, and then I arrange the schedule from there. So what is a parish mission? Parish mission is a series of sermons on the four last things, and also instructions, especially on the commandments, so that people know how to make a good confession. St. Alphonsus, he has a whole part of our rule dedicated to the exercises of the mission, and he says that the idea is that you want to be able to move. Yet he says. Start off getting the people interested. So actually appealing to the imagination, appealing to the emotions, so that it will move their will to want to know what they have to do to change their life to serve God more. So there's a whole psychology behind the Redemptorist style of preaching, actually. And it makes sense when you actually read what he says there. And so that's how it works. You've got what are called the great sermons, which are usually theatrical, sort of rather dramatic. They've got big stories and all sorts of exciting things. That's what people remember. They remember this is a different kind of preaching. Parish mission preaching. There's different. You've got homiletic preaching. You've got catechetical preaching. Then you have what's called parish mission style, and it's a style unto itself, actually, which is dramatic, it is theatrical, and it's meant to grab the imagination, grab the emotions, to get the will to want to do the right thing. And because once you've actually got people who want to make a good confession, it's like, boom, there you've got the God's grace. Once they can set sin behind them, then they are actually ready to say, what do I need to do to change my life? And then you're able to set them on the right route. That's what parish missions are. That's their usefulness in the church. Because unfortunately, we would love everyone to be able to get on retreats, obviously. That would be the ideal way. I make the comparison that parish missions are like a canvas, and you are putting the primer on the canvas. You don't have time during a parish mission to do all the fine artwork. You're just putting the primer on, that's it. Whereas with a retreat, you actually can dig into the soul deeper to know, where is God bringing this soul from? Where is God leading this soul to? What can I do to help this soul reach the end that God wants for it? And that's why, as opposed to the primer, this is sort of like the delicate artwork. You have to be very careful with the retreat. The retreat master has to be very careful in terms of what kind of strokes does he use on the painting, because even one sort of splotch is gonna completely mess up that soul, actually. You've got to be very, very careful of how God is trying to act in that soul. So that's sort of the difference between a parish mission and a retreat. So in the year 1988, Archbishop Lefebvre helped start a foundation of traditional Redemptorists in England, and eventually we moved through France and ultimately up to the Orkney Isles. And again, his idea was so that these traditional Redemptorists, who would be saying only the traditional Mass, obviously, and who would be keeping the original rule of St. Alphonsus, that we would be able to continue to live our Redemptorist life without hindrance from the modernists and without having to worry about our future. We'd be able to help out the Society of St. Pius X. So here we are 34 years later, and I'm the only Redemptorist right now here in the United States. We've got others over in Europe also who help out the Society as well. And we are continuing to live that vocation of ours. It's thanks to the auspices of the Society, and thanks to that generosity of Archbishop Lefebvre in the first place back in 1988. And we want to continue on that relationship of helping out the Society because our vocation is different. The Redemptorist vocation is, if you want, in a certain sense, the Redemptorist vocation lies halfway between the Society and, let's say, the Benedictines, perhaps. So the Society, very active, running parishes, running schools, etc. Benedictines being very contemplative and also a lot of manual work, whereas the Redemptorists are in between, this semi-contemplative life of preachers. And that's what our role is now, is going out to the Society chapels when we're called on in order to be able to preach there.
Mm-hmm. How many Redemptorists are there?
At the moment, I'm the only Redemptorist here in the United States. There's one other priest who helps out. This is a Society chapel over in Britain. We have 3 lay brothers over there also, and we're also looking towards the future, which will eventually be, God will make that known in his own time.